Well, what you're looking at, it dovetails into what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 41 in the life of Joseph. And this, this chapter is about power. And it's about who wields it, what is the source of power, and how do you cope with it, how you deal with it. And a lot of that, obviously, in life is recognizing where power really resides. Obviously, and the power, obviously, we know as Christians come from God. But as you know, as you see even in the prophecy update, and you look at what's going on in the world scene today, it's a human endeavor for the quest for power. And you can achieve power in this world by your wealth. You can achieve power by your notoriety, your fame, what you're recognized for. And typically notoriety is coming from a certain talent. Sometimes it's coming from an intellect, a high IQ. Sometimes it's coming from looks, whatever it takes. But notoriety then gets you there. And then other ones climb their way to power by authority. They work their way up the ladder in whatever company they're at, whatever job they're at, and they work their way to get to that point where they have authority, and that authority gives them power. And these are the three main issues that you're seeing people strive for today. Sometimes they don't even know they're doing it, but the grasp for power, you have to understand, is very Luciferian. This is exactly what Satan wanted. He wanted power. And in the satanic world, that's all that exists. There is no morality in the satanic world. It's all about who controls the power. And if you look at how humans are dealing with things, whether it's politics or local politics, or it's just the way people operate, they are following the Luciferian tactic of trying to gain as much power regardless of the morality in which they compromise with. Now, as an example of this power broker thing, you can see it all over society. And, not that you even care, but here's an example of a power broker like the NFL. That's a power broker, okay? The NFL is about power, and they gain their power by money and notoriety. Well, I mean, like one of this article was talking about that they had 4 NFL teams play 2 games within 3 days of each other. And of course, the NFL players were all ticked off about this because they're like, "There's no rest, and you're putting us at risk." And not that you care about that, but the point is, the NFL didn't care about its players. The NFL just cares about ratings. It cares about money. It cares about revenue. It cares about all that. And Christmas, Netflix was streaming NFL games, and it was like the highest streams ever because of that. So they don't care if these guys get hurt. They don't care. They're just a piece of meat, and obviously. The NFL is going to do what they want to do. Not that the NFL is some moral organization. They're not. I mean, they had their players all get vaccinated, for goodness sakes, But anyway, that's an example. Another example of authority, which is part of power, going wrong is woke Oregon Attorney General does her best to help illegal aliens dodge ICE. And this is now, a woman who's now abusing her authority to get what she wants. She has power, and she's going to defy things. I hope they put her in jail for this. That's anybody that's going to go against the federal government, deporting people or getting them out of our country. They need to go to jail because that's a federal crime. But again, what is it? This woman is drunk on power. She thinks that everything revolves around her. Here's another thing about power, about money funneling power. The World Bank, a very powerful institution. The United States contributes 16% to the World Bank's total capital through financial commitments. And yet, they've been running a climate scam and having all these countries give to them, but no one knows where $41 billion went to. It just disappeared. It's not even on the books. And so, through creative accounting, this is how, for instance, the World Bank accumulates power. is by a climate hoax and us giving them money. I hope Trump gets us out of that. Obviously, the other power broker that you're probably aware of is the media. They've been trying to change the narrative on all kinds of things, right? And we've seen the media just go haywire in the last 10 years. And I hope the mainstream media people understand that they're dead now. I mean, they still function and stuff, but who listens to Joe Scarborough? Who listens to Joy Reid? Who listens to these people? They're crazy. But it's about power. And I was listening to Rachel Maddow. They said she's going to take a pay cut. You understand Rachel Maddow gets paid $30 million a year, and her pay cut was only $5 million, so she still gets $25 million. That's called power. That's called, having power through money and influence and stuff like that. Can you imagine a lying newscaster making $25 million a year? For what? All they do is lie? And then you have the power brokers in politics, right? Joe Biden regrets withdrawing from 2024, believes he could have defeated Trump. I mean, really? You understand that these people never give up. They don't retire. They're aged, they're decrepit, they can't think straight, they're mentally impaired, and yet they won't give up the ghost. They won't give up the quest for power. We have Nancy Pelosi in California that won't give up her quest for power. It's like, dude, why don't you, with all your money, go retire? But notice they don't retire because you know why? It's not enough, because they don't want to let go of the power. FBI scientist claims Biden regime silenced lab leak evidence linking COVID-19 to Wuhan facility. This is all about power. This is all about money, and you know it, right? This is all what this whole thing was about. And here's the thing. These people, to get power, the ends justify the means. And they are criminals, really. I mean, So Nancy Pelosi, is anyone going to bust her for insider trading? Or how about Biden's corruption? Or Hunter's laptop? Or Hillary's emails? Is anyone going to bust these people? They're in such powerful positions. That's why you have a two-tiered system of justice going on in the world. And then here's an abuse of power and authority with the Pope. This guy's off the rails, man. Even with Catholics, they don't even agree with him. So now he alleges that Israel is machine gunning the children of Gaza. So much cruelty. What are you talking about, man? This is an abuse of power. When you just flat out lie because you're in a position of power and authority and no one holds you accountable, this is what power does to you. You can't control it. Says that Israel's military incursions in Gaza is terrorism and a massacre, and it basically constituted genocide. When we see these examples that I'm showing you, this is problematic. I mean, this is why power is such a problem for people. Okay, they can't control it. Here's another problem of power. The people in charge of California and the rest of our country will not fix the homeless problem. So homelessness was up 18% this year by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and California, of course, is number one. How come they don't fix it? Because it's money. Because money goes to power, so it's all about power. And I've told you this before, the people here in Kern County get money for the head counts of every homeless person. That's why they won't solve it. They want the money that comes from the state, and the state is willing to give them millions of dollars for every head count of homeless person on the roll. So they don't have no incentive to fix it because it's a money issue, and money equals power, right? Now, how about this? Here's a teacher, and we've seen this over and over again, of teachers abusing their power, abusing the authority they have over our children. Listen to this teacher. How would you like to send your kid to public school, and this is the kind of teacher that's grooming your children?
I came up with the best idea, and it involves my nails. So every day I have new nails because I like practicing, so they change a lot. And every day at morning meeting, I tell this made-up story, and I get really crazy with it. Today was that I got attacked by Cinderella, and this is the gold from her tiara, and this is the blue from her dress. So now, whenever I have a new color, I'm going to have the scholars write their own story to describe what happened to Mr. Morris on his way to school.
Here's Ireland. Here's a public library, and this guy in Ireland is exposing them. This is called an abuse of power, and what he's exposing.
There's too many there. When you go and spend any time.
You ready to come?
Let's go.
Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, excuse me. So what we're going to do is we're going to read the story.
This is
This is a disgrace. You're
This is morally wrong.
Excuse me.
Sorry,
This is wrong. Drag queen story time for children.
reading stories to children.
All wrong. Margot, give me that there.
Yeah.
Morally wrong. You're morally
Lads, this is absolutely disgraceful. We have kids, men dressed as prostitutes, reading filth to children. What's this all about, lads? We can't. Hi, how's it going? Lads, we can't stand for this.
This isn't great.
Drag queen story time. People are giving out about it in America. It's not welcome in Ireland. Look at all these people here, lads. They're a protection of grooming.
Get your umbrella.
Right.
We're not here to cause trouble. We're just trying to make people aware.
This is a piece. Look at this, lads. All around.
Watch.
Look what they have. They're protecting grooming going on in Tralee. There's grooming going on in Tralee. Yeah. No, I won't. This is a public library. We are members of the public.
This is an event, a children's event. You know that idiot.
Oh, don't be touching me. Hey, Steve, can you record this? Where are you, Steve?
Please.
All right. No, we're not going to. We have every right to be here. We've been asked to leave and we refuse to leave. You can call the Gardaí all you want. What should be called in the Gardaí is this grooming going on for children. How dare they? This is grooming. Why'd you have men dressed as women? They're not even dressed as women, they're dressed as prostitutes. Right?
You don't need to be insulting to people.
Excuse me, what's insulting is what you're doing to these kids here. Go on, push me out now, push me out. Push me out, come on, push me out. You're trying to manhandle me. But good luck to that. Good luck to that. Here we are, lads. Right, if you put on my face, I'm gonna have to.
So again, abuse of power. Public library in Ireland, obviously it's been here, puts kids in a room, brings transvestites in there, reads them stories, and this guy's exposing them. That's an abuse of power. That's an abuse of authority. And then it's no different than what's going on in the churches. So last week we celebrated Christmas. We focused in on the Logos, the incarnation of the Messiah. Other churches decided, though, we're going to celebrate Christmas by having Santa Claus come and fly in the worship services. Here's Prestonwood out of Texas, one of the largest churches in America, and this is what went on during their Christmas services. I don't know what that has to do with the birth of Messiah. Is that ridiculous? You know what that is? That's an abuse of power. That's an abuse of authority. That's the pastor, whoever, it's Jack Graham. That's an abuse of power. You're supposed to be teaching about the Messiah, about the incarnation, and you're having Santa Claus ride a sleigh taken off with fireworks going on in the services. What is that? It's an abuse. Now, here's the thing. I give you that as a starter before we get into the text to show you how abusive power is and what happens when people just go after power and authority and money and wealth. You couldn't put on a Christmas production. You saw that Christmas production without money. That's a Las Vegas show type of thing, right? You're having fireworks and you saw how big the stage is. You can't do that without money. That's an abuse of money. It's an abuse of power. Now, what you're going to see with Joseph, it's a power encounter with Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the most powerful guy on the planet at the time. Joseph is nobody, but yet he serves the most powerful being in the universe, which is God. And what you're going to see with Joseph and Pharaoh is a reversal of power. That God's the one in control, that God has the power, and you have to function under that rubric of power. As you can see in this kind of this hierarchy of how to understand power, and this is what Joseph understands, is the Lord is all-powerful. He's omnipotent, okay? But that power comes through the funnel or the filter of God's love and truth. So it's power that's balanced with love and truth. This is the only way power works. This is why humans can't control it, because humans don't typically love correctly and don't practice the truth. You think Nancy Pelosi practices the truth? You think Joe Biden practices the truth? Do you think that the public library grooming children is practicing love? Or do you think the gay teacher who's grooming the kids with his nails painted is practicing love? No, it's just simply power. So when you see what happens with God, power comes from love and truth. And then that power goes out and does give wealth, does give notoriety, and does give authority. Now, here's the thing. The wealth and the notoriety and authority that is delegated from God is handled by people who understand this system. So what happens is Joseph is now going to become second in command in Egypt. He'll become the second most powerful individual on the planet. But it's because when wealth comes to Joseph, he knows how to handle wealth because he understands the structure. When notoriety comes to Joseph, he will handle it correctly because he knows where the structure is, how it's built. And when authority gets to Joseph, he will handle it properly because he understands he is under God's power. That wealth, notoriety, and authority all stem from God. This is what Jesus said to Pilate. You would have no power over me had it not been given to you from above. Notoriety and authority and wealth are not bad in of themselves. It's how the person handles it, okay? So if you are in a powerful position of authority or money or notoriety, it better be for the right things. It better be under the rubric of God. And that's how Joseph functions, okay? And that's how Abraham functioned. Abraham had all three, and he functioned correctly. So let's go to the reversal of the power. So it's going to come through a dream. Joseph is the interpreter of the dreams. I'm going to take my time through this. And by the way, I'm going to get into archaeology. I'm going to get into the history of this a little bit. So for you history and archaeology buffs, you'll see a lot here. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years, so Joseph's been in prison 13 years, that Pharaoh had a dream. So Pharaoh is the most powerful individual on the planet. So think about the power structure, okay? And what's happening is God is going to show Pharaoh, you're not in control. Now, the good thing is this Pharaoh will react properly to the power being shown to him, okay, which is a good thing. The Pharaoh in Moses' day won't. And behold, he stood by the river. The river obviously is the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt. The river Nile represents the economy of Israel. Now, if you want to show someone they're not in control, if you want to show a nation that you're really not in control, that God's in control, you hit them in their economy. And what's happening to our economy for the last 4 years? We got hit hardcore. And we hope Trump can reverse some of this, but we are destroyed because of what Biden did to our economy, okay? Again, if you take a step back, what is that? It is sometimes a judgment from God when the economy of a nation goes in the tank, okay? Stood by the river, and suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. So the idea, this is very natural to what would happen in Egypt when it was hot. the livestock would go into the Nile and soak themselves in the Nile. So he sees the livestock going into the Nile and then coming out. So it represents the economy, right? Represents food, all that stuff. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke, he slept and dreamed a second time. So he awoke, and now another dream is going to hit him. Now the reason it's twice is God's going to emphasize that this is not an accident. I am trying to tell you something that you might be the most powerful man on the planet, but I'm going to reverse the fortune right now. And if you obey me and do what I tell you to do, then you will retain your power. And if you don't, I will take away your power. And suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, the sharav or the khamsin, which is the east wind that would come from the desert, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. So he's going to the priests and really the magi. Really, this is kind of the idea of the magi in Babylon, is that kind of idea that these are the occultists. These are those who are necromancers. These are those who are tapped into the demonic, tapped into the fallen angel world. And they do receive revelation from the demonic. And here's how it works. You have to understand something. This is what we call in theology terms a power encounter. So in the occult, typically you will have fortune tellers, necromancers, or mediums that will predict the future. And they're doing it because they're channeling demons. And the demons are giving them information. Now the demons don't know the future, but they can have an educated guess based on what they know about the individual. And what we understand from demonic interpretations is they can predict the future about 60% accuracy just because of knowledge. Not that they know the future, just because they know how humans work. And so the magicians that you see are the same magicians kind of mentality that you see in Daniel in Babylon later on. So what these guys do typically when people have dreams, and dreams, an interpretation of a dream was a big deal in Egypt and Babylon. And so you had guys in the occult that would interpret them based on channeling demons, telling them what the dreams. And typically the dreams were demonic dreams given to people. And then these channelers would interpret the demonic dream when the demon's actually interpreting the dream he gave to the person, if that makes sense. So it's all connected. And that's why they had so much success. It's because they were channeling demons who actually gave the dreams. In this situation, though, it's a power encounter. The dreams are not coming from the demonic, it's coming from God. And when the dreams come from God, the demonic has no ability to interpret them. That's called a power encounter. God is showing his power over the demonic in Pharaoh's world. It's a very occultic world, right? And I've seen that with a lot of people too. They will be steeped in the occult, steeped in Satanism, steeped in witchcraft, and all of a sudden God does a power encounter and invades the spiritual reality of that person and shows them the truth. So that's what's going on here. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for them. So the demons they're channeling can't do it. So now he's at a loss. Then the chief butler, if you remember him, he forgot Joseph for 2 years. So Joseph's been in prison 13 years, spoke to Pharaoh saying, I remember my faults this day. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker, we each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man. Notice the word Hebrew man. He won't name Joseph. And there's something going on in the text. I want to relate it to you in archaeology and history. They keep referring to Joseph as a Hebrew. Okay? We'll see this in archaeology and history, okay? So stay with me. With us there, a servant of the captain of the guard, obviously referring to Potiphar. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office and he hanged him, referring to the other guy. So then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved and changed his clothing and came to Pharaoh. So in Egypt, which is part and parcel of Egyptian, they were very hygienic. So they shaved their body hair. So he's going to be brought before Pharaoh, and so he needs to be shaved. They would shave their whole body. They would shave their facial hair, their hair sometimes, wear wigs, and shave all their body. They're smooth skin because of no hair. So it was a hygienic thing in Egypt for that. Anyway, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can to interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. That's the power right there. Notice how humble Joseph is. He didn't say, I'm so special and I can do this. He punts it to God because he knows the power structure. That's how you know someone understands power. They know where their authority comes from. They know where their talents come from. That's notoriety. What you're seeing is notoriety. He's known for interpreting dreams. And they know where their wealth comes from. If you know where those three elements come from, you can handle those issues. And notice how he handles it. It's not me. If you think you're sitting here on a Sunday morning that you're a self-made person, you're out of your mind. You are not a self-made person. God made you. Are you responsible to what he gave you? Of course you are. But the talents you have, the job you have, the businesses you run, the positions you have, the authority that you have, the money you have, it all comes from God. And if you don't understand that, you will not be able to handle power. It will destroy you. And that's a basis of what you're seeing with Joseph. He knows how to handle power given to him. The talent of interpreting dreams. He says, it's not me, it's God. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river, and suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness that I've never seen in the land of Egypt. That's right, it's unprecedented. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When he had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as the beginning, so I awoke. I also saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads of one stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads, withered thin, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them, and the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who can explain it to me. That's right, because this is coming from God, not from the occult. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh, not Joseph, God. God is the one doing this with the power. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. So what Joseph is telling Pharaoh, this is interesting. He is saying, you're not in control. The God I serve is in control. And he is telling you, you're going to have 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. Telling Pharaoh, the Nile God is not in control. Yahweh is. He controls what's going on in your economy. So this is a power encounter. Now, the great thing about this is a great example of a Gentile ruler that complies. And he's not going to buck the system. He's going to say, yeah, great, thank you very much. So the Pharaoh is going to show his humility, knowing that, yes, I understand. I'm not in control. This God that you serve is in control. That's amazing. That's really amazing. Because the Pharaoh in Moses' day is not going to do that, even though he's going to see supernatural things. So there's some humility here with this Pharaoh. So he says, indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come through all the land of Egypt, but after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because this thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. God uses 2 or 3 witnesses. That's why there's 2 dreams. God establishes something by 2 or 3 witnesses. That's why there's 2 dreams. Okay. So what you're talking about is a strike on the Egyptian economy. The Nile God's not going to save Pharaoh. Pharaoh's not thinking he's God on earth, is not going to save him. God is in control of the Nile. So what you're talking about is the failure of the Nile to either flood too much or too little. Everything is dependent on the Nile in Egypt. They're not dependent on rain, okay? Because it doesn't rain in Egypt. It's the Nile, and the rainwaters come from Central Africa and move their way through the Nile. So this is how famine would hit Egypt, is the flooding of the Nile or the non-flooding of the Nile. Now, let me go to a documentary here from Patterns of Evidence so you can understand this.
Egypt depended on the Nile for its survival, and the river often protected it from the famines that affected this part of the world. The prospect of starvation was a great concern for all in the ancient world, and the Bible's account of Joseph and the arrival of the Israelites features a particularly severe 7-year famine. I talked with 5 researchers about these important issues. The issue of famine is a concern for an ancient world.
The Nile was the source of Egypt's lifeblood. The Nile meant fertility, it meant prosperity. But on the other hand, if the Nile should fail, if there had been low rains in Central Africa, then the outcome is that the Nile would be low. And when the Nile is low, you have bad crops, you have inadequate irrigation going on, and so a bad Nile could mean famine. This was a perennial fear of Pharaoh. So the Nile was something very important to the Egyptians, and they watched very closely for indications. Would this be a good year or a bad year by when the Nile began to rise for the annual flood, which would occur basically August, September, October in our calendar. And that would really determine if it was going to be a good year or a bad year. Of course, an excessive flood could be devastating. Too little could be drought, and just right was obviously what they were hoping for. So what we have in the Joseph story is not just a prognostication for this current cycle, but for the next 14 years. So you can understand a Pharaoh who is concerned about the well-being of his country. Is there going to be enough food? Is there going to be enough to sustain his people? Would have been overjoyed by a 14-year economic projection of what was coming. So we can understand why Pharaoh would elevate such a person to a position to oversee this preparation for the 7 years of drought that was coming.
So what we have some interesting things that develop in Egyptian history. So for you history buffs, archaeology, I think this is fairly interesting. We have Pharaoh Djoser. He's from the 3rd dynasty of the Old Kingdom. So the dates for him are very early, okay? And again, Egyptian dating, it's suspect. It's not in stone about these certain dynasties. They think it is, but sometimes they get the dates wrong or whatever. But something's very interesting about Djoser, the Pharaoh Djoser, because here's what was found. This is a stone that was found, and they think it was written about 200 BC. And it's a recounting of Djoser and his vizier, or his prime minister. And again, there's a lot of telescoping that's done and this is Egyptian hieroglyphics, but there's an account that I want you to hear about that's very similar to Joseph's. Listen to this one guy.
In 2002, at the beginning of my investigation, I traveled up the Nile towards Aswan with Dr. Leonard Moeller, an Exodus explorer and DNA scientist. We wanted to examine an artifact that may preserve the faded memory of past events from the time of Joseph. This inscription was made by a group of Egyptian priests who appealed to an ancient story to make the claim that they had the right to the land and that they were exempt from paying taxes.
This is the famine stele on the Shilal Island at the first cataract of the Nile River. I was looking for a stone that was cracked. This is very typical for this inscription. It's cracked right across it. And it's stated here that the priests wanted the same rights to land and be without taxation as they were during the 7-year famine. This is made at least 1,000 years later, maybe even 1,500 years later. The important thing here is that they refer to this only 7-year famine known of in Egypt history.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
So we have it there,
Yeah,
we have it there, and we have it there.
Yes.
Most scholars believe this inscription was made in the Greek period, perhaps around 200 BC. While the unique reference to a 7-year famine as well as the tax and land claims do fit the biblical account of Joseph, the inscription portrays these events occurring during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser. He was the first ruler of the Old Kingdom, who lived more than 800 years before the pattern of evidence found at the end of the Middle Kingdom. These hieroglyphs may represent a historical composite, echoing events from the past, an account in which the Great Famine was combined with various details from other parts of ancient history that have been superimposed over one another. Scholars find such telescoping of history in other Egyptian documents.
So at least 3 times on Dozer's rock there is a reference to a 7-year famine. And again, written in 200 BC, but going backwards. And again, when the Egyptians write their history, they're writing it and they Egyptianize their history. So here's an interesting thing. In the reign of Djoser, there was a vizier, or what we would call a prime minister at that time. This guy actually became exalted and became worshipped in Egypt. But his name was Amhotep. Amhotep was such of importance and fame that he was honored by being mentioned in the statues of King Djoser at the necropolis at the Saqqara. He saved his country from a 7-year famine, was considered a genius in the Old Kingdom, wrote wisdom literature that is similar to some of the Psalms and Proverbs, and I've read them. Some of what this guy wrote, Amhotep, is almost parallel with multiple Psalms in your Bible and multiple Proverbs in your Bible. It's unbelievable. And when you read the two, he wrote wisdom literature, like I said. The base of the statue of Pharaoh Djoser was inscribed Amhotep, Chancellor of the King of Lower Egypt, Chief under the King, Administrator of the Great Palace, Hereditary Lord, High Priest of Heliopolis. By the way, that's who the priest of Heliopolis is who he married his daughter, by the way. Amhotep, he was a builder, a sculptor, and a maker of stone vases that are still there today. The vizier Amhotep was appointed second in command under Djoser's reign. He was also considered a great physician and a great architect. He designed the first step pyramid complex at Saqqara that included a wall-in center which contained huge grain bins. So, interesting enough, this is on the inscription of Amhotep. And this is an English translation of this. I asked him who was the chamberlain, Amhotep, the son of Ptah, what is the birthplace of the Nile? Who is the god there? Who is the god? Amhotep answers, I need the guidance of him who presides over the fowling net. Now again, this is written from an Egyptian standpoint, but it is a picture in the hieroglyphs of Pharaoh asking Amhotep, what's going on with the Nile? Who's the birthplace of the Nile? Are you in touch with that God? And Amhotep is saying, I will talk to you and get guidance from him. Now you can see an element of truth in that corruption. That's exactly what Joseph did. I will go to God. He will give me the interpretation of the dream about what's getting ready to happen. Amenhotep answers Pharaoh about the god of the Nile and tells him where he lives. The Nile god Khnum revealed himself to him in a dream and promised the Nile would pour forth her waters and the land would yield abundantly for 7 years. After 7 years, a drought. So again, it's Egyptian. It's reversed the 7 years, but it's this Amenhotep going to this particular god, getting the information, and coming back, there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. It's reversed, but you can see the corruption of the original story that comes from Genesis. So Gozer's promise to the Nile god, Khnum, in which the people were to be taxed 1/10 of everything except for the priests of the house of the god who would be exempted. Now this is interesting. It changes it. It's actually 1/5. Joseph will charge 20%. And notice that the house of the god, the priests are exempt. You'll see this in Genesis 47. The priests are exempt from the taxation that Joseph puts out on everybody in Egypt. So you can see there's the hints of the original story from Genesis that has been corrupted on this Egyptian hieroglyph. This is Saqqara. This is the first step pyramid, not made of bricks out of mud, but out of stones that were cut. If this Amenhotep is Joseph, then this is the pyramid Joseph built for this Pharaoh. The interesting thing is it's very complicated. It shows you that if this is Joseph, that Joseph is like an engineer, architect type of guy because he's the one who designed it. Amenhotep designed this. And it's, again, the first step pyramid that you can see if you go there today. The entrance to this place, this structure, there's only one entrance. There's 13 facade entrances, but there's only one entrance. Why is that important? Well, if all of Egypt is coming to one place to get grain, you got to have just one entrance. You can't have multiple entrances. You have to have an entrance, and then you have to have an exit. This place has one entrance. And you go through these columns. And in these columns, you can see the elaboration of this right here, but in these columns is where you would have done business to get your grain. So inside each column is a little cutout, and the guy would have a table, and you would come through these columns and meet with a guy, and you would purchase your grain through this area to get your grain. Now, again, we know that Joseph stored up the grain of Egypt for 7 years. It appears, and again, it's all theory, but it seems like the evidence is that Saqqara became a central mecca of where people came to get grain. I'll show you the granaries later on. There are huge granaries, massive granaries at this site. And the way the granaries funnel, it's a very complicated system. You put the grain in 7 areas, and it filters down into one and fills the one up. It's amazing the architecture and the engineering involved in this. If this is Joseph, Joseph is an engineering genius for the way he designed the granaries. And I'll show you them probably next week. The other interesting thing is, like we talked about, the Nile is the key to the famine. Whether it's too low or floods too much, you have to be able to control the Nile if you're going to control the economy of Egypt. Interesting enough, along the Nile is a canal that goes all the way up to Fayum and it empties into a lake. It's called the waterway of Joseph, Bar Yosef, that goes to the Fayum Basin. And you can see the Nile Delta, and you can see Fayum on the left-hand side in the green. And then on the right-hand side, I have it in yellow. This is the canal that's called the Canal of Joseph. So if you're going to control the Nile, you have to control the floodwater. You can't have it overflood. You have to have it controlled to be at a certain level. Interesting. Listen to this.
According to the text, though, it states that Joseph made preparations.
Yeah.
Do you find anything similar to that in Egypt?
You do, because of course there's 7 years of plenty which come before the 7 years of famine. And what we see in Egypt by way of preparation is the building of grain stores. We have this new administration that sets up called the Department of the People's Giving, where the people grow their crops and bring them to government storehouses where they're kept. And then apparently, when in times of crisis, the food's then redistributed back to the people. This Department of the People's Giving is exactly like the Joseph story.
I understand there's an interesting canal that actually has a similar association.
That's right. There's a canal or a cutting, a waterway that connects the Nile to the Pharaoh Basin. This is a large lake area, which has the name Bar Yosef, which means the waterway of Joseph. And this goes back thousands of years as far as we can tell.
Fascinating. So there's actually a canal that has the very name of Joseph. Why do you think that canal has that name?
Because I think he made it. I think it was under his instructions as Vizier of Egypt that canal was cut. And it was cut to divert half the water from the Nile into the Pharaoh Basin to protect the Nile Delta and the capital from excessive flooding.
So what you're suggesting is that Joseph knew about these floods that would wipe out the cropland, and he prepared by creating a canal to siphon off the water.
Reduce the water by half and you get back to the land of plenty again. If all the water comes down, then you have this disaster. But if you reduce it by half by diverting half the water, you then get back to the situation where the water levels are just right for growing crops.
Is that canal still, can you see it today?
It's still in use today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's still in use today. So here's a picture of what would happen as you divert the water.
The region that saw the most investment by these pharaohs is now known as the Fayum, but back then was known as the Tarsher, which means land of the lakes. This name comes from the fact that the region lay in a depression that was filled up with water whenever the Nile overflooded, creating many lakes. This made the region so lush that numerous groups of people came from the surrounding arid plateaus to settle, attracted by the abundant game and grasses. As such, many a pharaoh tried to take advantage of this land and built many irrigation systems in the Fayum. Nevertheless, it is believed that during the reign of Amenemhat III in the 19th century BCE, a canal linking the Nile to the Fayum was opened. This canal would branch off from the Nile in the city of Asiut. From there, it would follow the previously mentioned depression, although now expanded, flowing parallel to the Nile for hundreds of kilometers until it reached the city of Lahun, where stood a dam which served as a regulatory station for the canal. There, the waterway would either be closed or opened, depending on the time of the year. When the dam's sluices were closed in January, the waterways would be drained and cleared in order to be ready for the year's flood. Officially, after crossing this dam, one would find themselves in the Fayum proper, where the remainder of the canal would discharge into the Lake Moiris, which, during the flood season, was estimated to double in size, providing the Egyptians with 27,000 new acres of farmland. Nowadays, this canal is known as the Bar Yusuf, but to the Greeks, it was known as the Diarrhix Megale, the Great Canal. This title is well justified, as its construction revolutionized the Fayum for millennia to come, still being used to this very day as an important irrigation system.
So here's some pictures of the canal. This is Joseph's canal. And if we're on the target, this canal still exists today from the time of Joseph. And it's a pretty large canal, as you can see. It diverts a lot of the water. God leaves always a piece of evidence behind that he was there. And what I think you're seeing in the land of Egypt is the hints of Joseph. Now therefore let Pharaoh select discerning a wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this and let him appoint officers over the land and collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep the food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God? So this is where the reversal of fortunes happen. Joseph goes from the prison, now he's going to go to the palace. He's going to go to the second highest in command because of his ability that God gave him to interpret the dream. And again, what does God do? The whole point about power, Pharaoh's the most powerful man on earth, but he's not more powerful than God. And God now is going to put his lowliest servant who can handle power in the second highest position over Egypt because of the ability to interpret the dream. So it's a reversal of fortunes. So here's the thing, before I move on any further. God has predicted a 14-year economic plan. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of drought. But what happens is a principle. Notice what Joseph is about to do. He is saying, here's what you need to do. Because this is going to go down, you need to collect grain and store it for the first 7 years. And then when you sell it during the famine, you need to sell it and profit from it. And you will then be able to own basically all of the world because of this. You will amass power, you will amass wealth by doing this. And we're going to tax everybody by 20% of their grain in order to do this and make this happen. What is that? That is being responsible to the revelation that God shows. God says, this is going to happen. And Joseph doesn't say, well, there's nothing we can do here. I guess we're going to have to sit and just ride this one through. No, he doesn't. He then gives Pharaoh advice. Here's how you're going to survive if this is what's going to happen. It is responsibility to prophecy. Okay? So again, let me give you an example. We know that things will continue to get worse in this world. It's prophesied. It doesn't get better, it gets worse. So does that mean I throw up my hands and surrender and wave the white towel and say, whatever will be, will be? No. That means I'm responsible, even though I know it's going to get bad, I'm responsible to be salt and light. So I have to do something in reaction to the revelation that has been given to me. If I know that all of the world is going to come against Israel, do I just let it happen? No. I take a pro-Israel stance and I protect Israel as much as I can. If I know the church is going to go into the tank as predicted, do I just let it happen? No. I become responsible to maintain some sanity while everyone else goes down the tank, right? And that's the same with you, because people say, well, you know, Brandon, it's predicted that everything goes bad. There's a one world government coming. They go digital currency. Yeah, I know, but that doesn't mean you surrender. That means you fight. That you fight against it. You know what's coming, so fight against it. You're responsible. So what ends up happening typically in theology is you have this theological fatalism that comes. And it comes from Calvinism. And it's like, well, que sera, whatever will be, you know, let go and let God, and I'm not going to worry about it. No. That's the wrong attitude. That's fatalism. That's pagan fatalism. If God tells you something's going to happen, you are responsible for that information. And that's what Joseph is illustrating to us. He's saying, wait a second, we got to do something here. If God's telling you it's going to do, you're going to have to store grain. You're going to have to prepare for a rainy day. You're going to have to save. Oh, yeah. Do not ever go into the mode of pagan fatalism and be irresponsible with your life. That's not how God expects you to do anything. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all of this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over the land of Egypt. This is interesting. Here's another piece of history. I think that's very interesting and coincides with what's going on with Joseph. Joseph arrives in Egypt and he's dealing with this Pharaoh, but this Pharaoh is not Egyptian. This Pharaoh, this is the period of time called the Hyksos. They are Semitic pharaohs that have taken over Egypt at this period of time. They're not Egyptian. And they're called the king shepherds. From about 1650 to 1550 BC is when they rule in Egypt. They're Semitic. This is interesting. And then by 1500 BC, they are expelled out of Egypt en masse. All of them leave en masse about 1500 BC. What does that sound like? It sounds like the Exodus to me. And when this Pharaoh that doesn't know Joseph in Moses' time is a non-Hyksos. So, interesting enough, Joseph gets into Egypt at the time where Pharaoh is a Hyksos. He's Semitic, and Joseph is a Semite as well. The concept of a Jewish is not understood at this point in time. What's understood is, are you Semitic? Do you come from Syria? Do you come from Haran? Do you come from Cana? So the Hyksos come from Cana. And therefore, it appears that this Pharaoh is sympathetic to Joseph based on ethnicity. He's not Egyptian. Interesting. And you can see in the hieroglyphs, when the Hyksos come to it, notice the garments they wear. This is Egyptian, right? Look at the garments. The garments are not typically Egyptian. These are Semitic people coming into it. And by the way, it is the Hyksos that introduced the horse and chariot into Egypt. It is not the Egyptians. It was the Hyksos, the Semitic people that came from Canaan and came from Syria that brought the horse and chariot into Egypt. Here's the hieroglyphs. These are the Hyksos that brought them in. By the way, interesting enough, hang on to your hats, because I think this is fascinating. The current archaeological dig of Ramesses in Egypt has two locations. One on the top is Ramesses, and the other one is Avaris. Avaris is underneath the city of Ramses. The seat of power of the Hyksos is in Avaris. If you can look at the Nile Delta and you see the yellow circle, that is where Avaris is. It's called the land of Goshen. It's where it's at. This is where Avaris is. Simcha, Yakoboviki, I can't pronounce his name, Yakoboviki, said this: Joseph is repeatedly called a Hebrew. Remember, I noted that in the text. There was a Hebrew in prison. Remember they said that? Ivri in the Hebrew language. He is also repeatedly and curiously called Ha'ish, the man. In other words, the word Avaris may very well be related to Joseph, the Ish Ivri, or the Hebrew man, which gives you the name Avarish or Avaris. This is what Avaris looked like. Notice the buildings are non-Egyptian. This is from 3D archaeological remains of Avaris. These buildings are Syrian. They are Canaanite types of buildings. Look at this. That's not Egyptian. It reminds me of Israel, doesn't it? It reminds me of Syria. It reminds me of other types of people. And yet, this was the center of power in Egypt at the time. Look at this house. This is a typical Canaanite house in Avaris. But guess what? This house then was built over, and you can see a different side of this, and you can see it in the white. It became somewhat of a palace. So it goes from this to this. All of a sudden, this looks like this is not an Egyptian that's living there. It's very Semitic, but yet it's a palace for somebody in Avaris. That's very, very important. By the way, here's the side view of the backyard. The backyard of this palace has graves, which is non-Egyptian. Egyptians buried their dead outside of the city. These individuals buried in their backyard. In this palace's backyard are monuments or graves of individuals. Notice how many graves there are. Count them up. There's 12. There's 12 graves in this guy's backyard. Notice this grave. It is a pyramid structure, but it's Semitic. It's Semitic, and it's not a pharaoh, but it's someone very, very important. Inside the grave was found this head. This is a non-Egyptian haircut. It is a mushroom haircut, which was known to be Semitic during the period of time. This was the fashion of not the Egyptians, but the Semites. The mushroom haircut. The statue that was found inside this tomb is an individual that has a mushroom haircut and his skin color is yellow, which is how the Egyptians painted Semite people who are white. They painted them with the color yellow in their skin color. Notice the coat on this individual. Notice in his left hand, he's almost like it's a boomerang type of thing that he's holding, which indicates he's in charge. But yet he is not Egyptian. He is wearing a Semitic coat of many colors. He has red hair. If you look at the archaeological remains of this individual, you can see the colors on the shoulder and the hair. The face was dug out, by the way. The face, somebody went in there and dug the face. But you can't miss what the statue would have looked like. Now, let me end here because I've went too long. Guess what? When they dug this grave up, this was in shambles. This individual was on the ground with a mushroom haircut and it was on the ground. When they opened the grave, guess what they found inside the grave? Nothing. There's no body in this monument of this Semite with red hair, with a coat of many colors that's wearing a Semite type of coat. Why is there no bones in this guy's grave? What's the rest of the story that you know? What did Moses do when they left Egypt? They took Joseph's bones with them. And when you go to this individual of this palace, he's got 12 colonnades. He's got 12 graves in the backyard, including his own. There's 12. How many sons did Jacob have? 12. They buried him right in the body, and there's no body in there. There's no bones. It's gone. You're looking possibly at Joseph. So that indicates that Joseph was redheaded. Does that sound familiar? Who else was redheaded? David was redheaded. The genetic line of red hair comes through the Jews, and it's one of the traits you'll see in Israel. They're redheaded to this day. We have people in our church that are redheaded that are Jewish. Did you know that? They're redheaded. That redhead goes all the way back to Joseph. Joseph, if that's Joseph, and I believe it is, he was redheaded. He had a mushroom haircut. He's a Semite. And he had a palace, and he buried all of his brothers, including himself, in the yard. And the bones are not there. That is absolutely amazing to me. Absolutely off the chart. And let me tell you the conspiracy, and I got to let you go. I'm sorry about this. I'm so excited about it. The Cairo Museum has this bust of Joseph, and they refuse to put it on display. They are hiding it from the public. They will not let it out. It's deep down hidden in the Cairo Museum. You tell me why. Why will they not let this out once it was found? Because they do not, the Muslims in Egypt do not want any hint that there was a Jewish man named Joseph who ruled over Egypt in that period of time. They refuse to talk about the history of the Israelites being in Egypt. And here it is, staring them right in the face, and they're hiding Joseph's statue. Isn't that amazing? But here's the thing. You can't hide the Word of God. Because the Word of God says he was in Joseph. You saw the canal that Joseph built. It's with us to this day. You saw the engineering feat. It's still with us to this day. Joseph was an amazing individual. He was off the chart intelligent. He was handsome. But you know what? Here's the thing. He controlled the power that God gave him. You know why? Because he knew where the power came from. And that is the only way he handled it. Let's learn that lesson from Joseph. Let's pray. Father, thank you, Lord, for what we can understand about Joseph's life and what he did. And the archaeology, the history is all full of the evidence that you were working through him in Egypt. An amazing, amazing thing, Father, that increases our faith. But help us to be like Joseph, to understand that you have all the power, that anything that we have, money, power, wealth, whatever authority, derives from you. And help us to use it wisely, Father. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.